Alright, what's up everybody? This is SimAI from Phantom Knight Trading Company, and I'm here to give you the lowdown on Legacy format, which is a new format that they introduced into the game. They replaced Unlimited with the Legacy format, and so now Legacy format covers basically all of the Hard Gold Soul Silver era and all of the Black and White era, but it does not include any of the XY era. So what that means is for the format is that you're not going to have any new sets that enter the format. So whatever cards that we have in those two eras are exactly what we got to work with, which means that our potential decks will be limited to a certain extent, but there's still plenty of opportunities to create some creative decks. But what I'm going to do here is, in this video, I'm going to introduce to you some of the staples of the format so that you guys can get a heads up on how to build your decks. And the next couple of videos that we do on Legacy will showcase some of the top decks as well as some of the most rogue decks that you'll find, and that should give you guys uh, some way to kind of as guidance to build your decks, to see how you like the format, seeing what it can give to you, and the tournaments for Legacy format are currently giving out Legendary Treasures packs and Call of Legends packs, and Call of Legends used to be a very valuable and rare pack, but because no one could find them anymore, the game was not distributing them anymore, and so they used to be worth about 20 packs each. But now that they've entered the Legacy tournaments, they're worth a little bit less than that, but still pretty valuable since it's the first time in years that they've ever released Call of Legends like this. So definitely you want to go over there and enter those tournaments, spend some of the tickets you've been saving up, and win some of those packs because they're trading pretty well in public right now. So I just wanted to give a heads up on that. But yeah, so this video is just going to go through a lot of the trainers that you have as options, and it's going to go through a lot of maybe some of the Pokemon that we want to talk about. I don't want to talk about all of them because when we showcase the deck videos, you'll see a lot of the big competitive EXs and some of the more competitive Pokemon. But I just wanted to give you a taste of the Pokemon today, and I wanted to give you a lowdown on all of the trainers. So, with that, the very first trainer that you'll want to know about is Professor Oak's new theory. So, Professor Oak, um, this supporter is considered by many to be one of the best supporters ever printed, because its ability is shuffle your hand into your deck, then just draw 6 cards. So you don't lose any of your valuable resources this way, and you can draw 6 cards out of it. By far and large, most people you ask who played in this format in this era will tell you that Professor Oak's new theory is one of the best supporters you'll get, and this paired with Juniper kind of gives you all of the draw options that you'll ever want in any format. Uh, if you've only been playing the game for a year or less, you probably have never seen this card or heard of this card. But and so what you've been using is N, because everyone used to run 4N 4 Juniper to make up their draw support. And now with Professor Oak's new theory, though, N can be useless if you're really far ahead in the game and you only have a couple of prizes left, and you still need to get some draw. You don't want to use N because you're going to end yourself down to like 1 or 2 cards. So in this case, that's where Professor Oak's new theory comes in. Is it'll help you out if you have 1 or 2 left over in your deck to be able to draw 6 cards, and that should be able to help you close out the match there. But this is definitely one of the strongest supporters you're going to find in this new format. Most people will run 2 to 3 in every deck. Me personally, I like to put in about 2 since I want a mix of both Oak's New Theory and N. Since N has a lot of utility late game if you're behind and you want to just basically end your opponent down to a low card size, and or you want to just shuffle your opponent's hand regardless. Maybe he pulled a card that that he has in his hand that's really valuable to him, but he didn't play it. Then you want to get rid of that card from his hand, and so you're going to play N instead of Oak's New Theory. And that's really the main difference between Oak's New Theory and N is Oak's New Theory only works on your cards in your hand. It's not going to work on the opponent's hand. And so that's the big differentiating factor between Oak and N. And that's why, personally, I like to have a combination of the two, because I like to be able to manipulate my opponent's hand as well as have some consistent draw on my end. So definitely you're going to be playing this. I would encourage you to try it out. and see how you like it. See what balance you want. You know, so people have different opinions. Some people want 3 oak, some people want 3N, and some people want both 3 oak and 3N. So it really is kind of preference, and you're gonna develop that preference as you play. So since we've talked about N, let's talk about N a little bit more. So N is basically one of the best supporters played. You've probably heard of this one since it's going to be coming back in standard, so it's going to be useful for you to know exactly the ability of this card. Any competitive player you talk to is going to know about this card, and they're going to tell you that they've either won a lot of games with N or lost a lot of games with N or both, because that's exactly what this card is. This card is this one card can disrupt your opponent, can flip a match upside down. I've literally come back from me having 6 prizes, and my opponent has 1 left, and I play an N, and I just keep ending him, and I eventually won a match like that, because it's insane what he can do. So it says, each player shuffle his or her hand into his or her deck, then each player draws a card for each of his or her remaining prize cards. So in the very beginning of the match, N will give you draw support. You know, you shuffle your hand in your deck and you draw 6. 6 is a pretty good draw engine, and usually that helps you get set up pretty quickly. As the match goes on, though, and one opponent or one player gets ahead in the match, the person that gets ahead gets hurt more by N. So if you're really behind in the match and the opponent has maybe 1 or 2 prizes left, if you end him, your hand increases and his hand decreases. So that's one of the biggest benefits of N, is that early on it provides draw support, late game it provides disruption. So its utility as a supporter is above and beyond one of the best supporters you'll find. And most competitive decks in Legacy will definitely run a couple of N. Like I said with Oak, it varies based on the person you talk to. Me personally, I like about 2 to 3 N in my decks. I'll usually play 2 N and 2 Oak just for reference. But other people might want to play more. But definitely try this card out if you haven't already, because it's coming back in standard as well, so you're going to be seeing it. You're going to want to know how to use it effectively. The next card we'll talk about is going to be pretty standard, just Professor Juniper. Discard your hand and draw 7 cards. You can't really beat a supporter like this. It's by far and large the best supporter. This and Oak is basically in competition for being the best supporters ever printed, because discarding your hand and drawing 7 is about as best as a draw engine you're ever going to get. And the benefit to discarding your hand is that you don't end up drawing those same cards back. So your chances of drawing something that you really want out of your deck increases higher based on statistics if you discard your hand and then draw 7 versus shuffle your hand and then draw 7. So you'll definitely want to run some Junipers. Now, one biggest difference between Legacy and Standard is there is no VS Seeker. And so if there is no VS Seeker, that means your amount of resources in your deck are all you're going to get. So if you discard your hand, make sure you're not discarding valuable resources, because otherwise you're not going to get them back. And if your hand is like full of a bunch of draw supporters and you chose Juniper, you lose all those draw supporters, and there's no way of getting it back except for like 1 card that'll help you out, which is an ace spec. So if you lose your hand, you're not getting many of the supporters back. If you lose your items, there is a way to bring items back, and we'll talk about that more later. But definitely, you've probably seen this card, so I'm not going to go into it all that much. But let's move on to another one that you probably haven't seen. That's going to be Pokemon Collector. So this says basically search your deck for 3 basic Pokemon, show them to your opponent, and put them into your hand. Shuffle your deck afterwards. So it's an even stronger fan club. Fan club gives you 2, Collector gives you 3. And a lot of the decks in Legacy are going to run basic EXs. Since there are no Mega Pokemon in Legacy, this Collector should be able to bring you a lot of cards that you'll need throughout the match. Think of it as a Hoopa for EXs, and think of it as a Collector just for non-evolved Pokemon, like Suicune is an example. So on your very first turn, if you can get a Collector off, you're going to get 3 of your Pokemon in play. And again, We don't have things like Winona, we don't have things like Bridget, we don't have Fan Club, and we don't have Hoopa. So outside of Ultra Balls and a couple of other balls, Collector is going to be the main way you're going to be able to just gather up a bunch of your Pokemon and just put them on the bench. One key thing to mention though is these cards go into your hand, not directly to the bench. So if you want to, like, let's say you want to get a Jirachi or one of the old Shaymins or anything like that, you're going to be able to get them into your hand and then play them to activate their abilities. So it's not going to be like Bridget where it just puts them directly onto your bench. It's not going to work that way. And that makes this card even stronger than Bridget, and it makes it one of the strongest collector. It's going to make it one of the strongest Pokemon collecting draw supporters. Not draw supporter, but Pokemon supporter that you're going to get. Not every deck's going to need this. A couple of decks will run one or two. You usually not going to increase the counts higher than 2 or 3. Three will make it somewhat consistent in your opening hand, but a lot of decks are going to be really tight on space, so they're not going to use Collector, or they're going to use maybe 1 or 2 copies at most. If you run Jirachi, which is something we'll talk about later, then Jirachi will help you to get Collector out early. So you only ever going to need 1 or 2 copies, basically. So let's move on to another incredible card from the old era. It's going to be Junk Arm. This card is one of the strongest cards, again, ever printed. Discard 2 cards from your hand, search your discard pile for a trainer card, show it to your opponent, and put it into your hand. You can't choose Junk Arm with the effect of this card. So if some of you have played Expanded, you know about the trainer Dowsing Machine. Dowsing Machine is an ace spec, which means that you are only allowed 1 in your deck. And Dowsing Machine works in a lot of ways very similar to Junk Arm, where you can basically grab a trainer or a supporter from your discard pile. With Junk Arm, though, let me just pull up Dowsing Machine so I can show you what it does. So discard 2 cards from your hand. If you can't discard, blah, blah, blah. Put a trainer card from your discard pile into your hand. Now, they call it a trainer card, but you should be able to get supporters from this as well. So Dowsing Machine will work on supporters. Junk Arm will not. That's a key difference that you need to know about. But Junk Arm is going to give you any tool or item or whatever trainer card you need into your hand by discarding 2 cards from your hand. So if you run a single energy recovery, like let's say energy retrieval, you have with Junk Arm the equivalent of 4 more energy retrievals. Ace specs can be gotten with Junk Arm because all the ace specs are trainers. So run a computer search in your deck, and for Junk Arm, you basically have 5 computer searches available to you. So you can see how strong this card can be if it can even get back ace specs. Float stones, you run 2 float stones in your deck. With 4 Junk Arm, you have 6 float stones in your deck. That's how you got to think about it. And any item that you need, you're going to be able to get it back in your hand with Junk Arm. So most decks will run this card. Most decks will run up to 3 copies. A lot of decks will run 4 copies because it depends on the kind of combination of supporters that they want to use. But definitely you're going to want this card to get back any item that you want. There are some items out there like Random Receiver that will allow you to extract a supporter from your deck. And Junk Arm allows you to use a Random Receiver over again. So if you're ever dead drawing and you have a Junk Arm in your hand and a Random Receiver in your discard pile, then you can just use it to grab a supporter. So the utility of this kind of card, with its flexibility in getting back any type of item, and a lot of items having a lot of strong powers, this card is one of the most broken cards they printed, and that's why it became an ace spec in BW era, because it was too strong to be printed as just a trainer that you can put 4 of in a deck. So that's another huge one to know about. Let's see here. We're going to move on to Duel Ball. Duel Ball is the old way that people got Pokemon out. So back in the Hard Gold Soul Silver era, there was no Ultra Ball, but we did have Duel Ball. And Duel Ball says flip 2 coins. For each head, search your deck for a basic Pokemon, show it to your opponent, and put him into your hand. If you do, shuffle your deck afterwards. So, on average, you're going to have 1 success. If you flip 2 coins, on average, you're going to have at least 1 heads. And so Duel Ball is a way to get a basic Pokemon into your hand for free. No discarding 2 cards like Ultra Ball. No special clauses like Heavy Ball needing retreat or anything like that. Duel Ball, just, you flip 2 coins. If you get a single heads, you can get a Pokemon from your deck. If you get 2 heads, you get 2 Pokemon from your deck. If you get 2 tails, the card doesn't do anything. But statistically speaking, flipping 2 coins, you're going to get at least 1 heads. And so that's why a lot of people run Duel Ball over Ultra Ball, especially if they're running Junk Arms. Because Junk Arm, you have to discard 2 cards from your hand. Ultra Ball, you have to discard 2 cards from your hand. That, if you think about wanting to play 4 Junk Arm and 4 Ultra Ball, that's 16 cards that you'd have to discard to use those items. And 16 cards is a ton of resources that you don't want to discard. So people will often opt to play Duel Ball instead of Ultra Ball. Ultra Ball can get you any Pokemon. Duel Ball can only get you basic, so that's a silver lining there. If your deck is an evolution deck, you don't want to run Duel Ball. You want to run Ultra Ball. And if your deck is an evolution deck, then you're going to also want to run at least 1 Execute, and we'll talk about that later. But Duel Ball is a good card, especially if your deck is only a basic decks. You can just use this without burning any resources, and you can save your discards for your Junk Arm to return your items. Sometimes people like a mix of Duel Ball and Ultra Ball, just in case. Sometimes it's really good to discard more cards from your hand, because in a match, the Legacy format is a little slower, but in a match in general, it's not gonna last long enough for you to use every single card in your deck. You're gonna have to discard some cards at some point along the way. And the more cards you discard, the better your draws are going to be with your shuffle supporters and your discard supporters. So thinning out your deck is a pretty advanced strategy that a lot of strong players will utilize. And so that's why sometimes it's really good to have the ability to discard items. I know personally I've had hands where there's like 1 or 2 things I'm looking for in my deck, and I really want to increase my chances of drawing it. So I use up some Ultra Balls that I have in my hand to discard away stuff I don't need. And then I use a shuffle supporter to shuffle my hand in and draw a new set of cards. And since I've discarded some of the resources, I don't draw those in, and so I've thinned my deck out to be able to increase the chances of getting something that I need. So the ability to discard is strong, but you don't want to overdo it, like having 4 Ultra Balls and 4 Junk Arms. That's 16 cards. So that's where Duel Ball comes in. Some people will like I said, they'll want a mix of stuff. They might play 2 Duel Ball and 2 Ultra Ball, or 3 Ultra Balls and 1 Duel Ball, or no Ultra Balls and all Duel Balls. It depends on your style. So try this card out in your builds and see how you like it. See if it's been consistent. There is the off chance that you're going to get 2 tails, and with PTCGOs, RNG, that's a bigger risk than it otherwise would be. But try it out, see if you like it, see if the risk is worth the reward for not having to discard anything, and I think you're going to find that it's a very playable card for sure. Alright, the next card we're going to go into is Lost Remover. Now, these days in Expanded and Standard, you have Enhanced Hammer. Enhanced Hammer discards a special energy on the field, on your opponent's side of the field, and it's gone, but it's still in the discard. So if they have Pokemon that can accelerate energy from the discard onto the bench, even special energy like Thundurus is an example, then they can still use those special energy even though you discarded it with Enhanced Hammer. But not so with Lost Remover. So in the Heart Gold Soul Silver era, they had a gimmick called the Lost Zone, where it's almost like a separate discard pile, and it works with different mechanics. And there are very few ways to bring something back from the Lost Zone discard pile versus bringing something back from the normal discard pile. It's almost impossible, or in any realistic way, to get anything back from the Lost Zone. So once you discard a special energy, which is what this card does, it says put 1 special energy attached to one of your opponent's Pokemon in the Lost Zone. Once you discard that special energy, it's not available to them anymore. They can't get it back. And so, for all intents and purposes, you know, that card just doesn't exist for them anymore. So it's a much stronger Enhance Hammer because they can't manipulate it even from the discard because it's not in the discard anymore. It's in the lost zone. So you're gonna see this run in decks, and I don't want you to be surprised with them. Just know that it's a stronger version of Enhance Hammer, and if they do discard one of your special energy, you're not getting it back. Now, it's also a trainer, so when you use it once, you can use Junk Arm to bring it back and use it again. So some people, they'll run 1 or 2 copies, and then they'll use Junk Arm to chain Lost Removers to get rid of special energy if your deck is really heavily reliant on special energy, like Plasma decks is an example that really heavily utilizes special energy. So definitely be in the lookout for this card. If you get a couple copies, try it out in your decks as an Enhanced Hammer replacement because it's far superior to Enhanced Hammer in every way. And yeah, so let's move on to, here's a card you'll probably know, Tool Scrapper. So Tool Scrapper is, in Legacy, you're not going to have the option of Startling Megaphone, and you're not going to have the option of Jurassic. So Tool Scrapper is going to be your main way that you discard the opponent's tools that are attached. And there's a huge elephant in the room with one of the biggest, most powerful decks in Legacy, which is Celebi Genesect. And Genesect uses G Booster, which is an ace spec. So Tool Scrapper is your answer to their G Booster to a certain extent. Tool Scrapper, choose up to 2 Pokemon 2 cards attached to Pokemon in play, yours and your opponent, and discard them. So that's really good. If your deck is an ability deck that relies, on ability like Genesect is, and the opponent runs Garbodor with, they usually put Float Stones on Garbodor, Tool Scrapper gets rid of their Float Stone. If your opponent is a Genesect with a G Booster, Tool Scrapper gets rid of their G Booster. Your opponent is Darkrai with Dark Claw, which we'll talk about later. Tool Scrapper gets rid of their Dark Claw. So, and then also you have Evolight, you have Rocky Helmet. There's no muscle bands in Legacy, but there are other options for damage or manipulating damage output and taking damage. So that's what Tool Scrapper comes in. Usually you'll see it as a one of in most decks, specifically because of Genesect and also Garbodor, or just anything that you want to deal with, any tools you want to deal with on the opponent. So if you run just one of them, Junk Arm can get it back for you, so you can use you can use it in a match up to 2 to 3 times. So this is your main primary option to deal with the opponent's tools in this new format. We're gonna go on to Rocky Helmet. So if the Pokemon this card is attached to is your active Pokemon and is damaged by an opponent's attack, even if that Pokemon is knocked out, put 2 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon. So without Muscle Band, you're going to have to be a little more creative in dealing damage or mitigating damage, and Rocky Helmet is an option. If they hit you, they take 20 damage. So it's kind of similar to Muscle Band, where Muscle Band increases your damage output by 20, but Rocky Helmet, if they just hit you, they take 20. So sometimes it can be important, that extra 20 here and there. One example is if you're going to run Virizion and Genesect. Virizion does 50, Genesect does 100, and so if you think about the math, that's not enough to KO an EX, right? So some people, what they'll do is they'll put Rocky Helmet on Virizion, and Virizion does 50, the opponent hits the Virizion for 20 more to get to 70, then you switch out to your Genesect and do 100 for 170 to KO an EX. So that's one option, and that's one example of how to use Rocky Helmet. You're not going to see it in all decks, and it is kind of a specialty item. Do the math on some of your Pokemon's damages, and just like I did with Virizion and Genesect, and figure out if Rocky Helmet is a good option for you. But definitely you'll probably see this. There are some decks that are basically anti-EX decks, and they're going to use Rocky Helmet heavily to just start stacking on damage. And with Hypnotoxic Laser and Burbank City Gym, that's a 30 damage right there. Rocky Helmet's 20. There are some Pokemon like Dredigan that if you hit them does 20 more for another 20. So that's, damages can add up pretty quickly in this format. I'm having a terrible spelling day. The next one we're going to talk about is Evolight. If I can ever find it. Let's see, where's Evolight? Okay, not here. How do you spell Evolight? Evolight. Okay, so here's what the card I'm trying to get at. If the Pokemon on this card is attached with a basic Pokemon, any damage done to this Pokemon by attacks is reduced by 20. So Muscle Band, like I said, increases by 20. Evolight is your option to reduce by 20. Before Muscle Band was printed in XY, this was one of the biggest cards that people used just as a tool to attach because it reduces damage by 20. So it's almost like a reverse Muscle Band where they just don't do as much damage as they otherwise would. Without Muscle Band, this is kind of your primary option of manipulating damage along with Rocky Helmet. So it's definitely worth knowing about. You're going to see it used in several decks. There's a lot of Pokemon that do snipe damage in Legacy. Two biggest examples being Genesect will do 20 to the bench, and Darkrai will do 30 to the bench. And another example is Kyurem, which will do 30 to the bench. So slapping on an Eviolite to a bench Pokemon makes a big difference, especially because in Legacy format there is no Lysander, and Catcher is still with the new errata, where you have to flip a coin for it to work. So we'll talk about Catcher, but there's not much threat of the opponent bringing out one of your benched Pokemon. Outside of Genesect being the biggest example, but beyond that, there's really, your bench is pretty much safe except for through snipe damage. So that's where Eviolite comes in. You know, if you have a Jirachi sitting on your bench, just slap on an Eviolite, and so Darkrai's will be able to do less against it. Kyurems will do less. Genesect won't do anything. So that's an option to protect some of your bench, or it's an option to protect your active if you just don't have a tool like Rocky Helmet or anything like that. Eviolite will just help keep your Pokemon surviving a little longer. Definitely playable, and you'll probably see it. Next card to talk about is Tropical Beach. So, in the heyday of Black and White era, before a lot of the new stadiums got printed, Tropical Beach was the de facto standard stadium that every deck played because it's just amazing. Once during each player's turn, and so that's important to know. It works on both you and your opponent. Once during each player's turn, that player may draw cards until he or she has 7 cards in her hand. If he or she does, that player's turn ends. So this is draw support in a format where there is no VS Seeker. So this is one of the best stadiums you're going to find, probably tied with Burbank as being one of the top two. Those are the top 2 basic stadiums right there, Burbank and Tropical Beach here. So think about how you're going to play this card. So let's say you start a match, your very first turn, you're not attacking, and you try to get set up, right? Well, you're usually not going to have a hand that's up to 7 cards or 6 cards even, right? You're usually going to play stuff from your hand, and your hand's probably going to be left at about like usually 3-4 cards, but you have that supporter in your hand for next turn or something like that. So that's where Tropical Beach comes in. If you have it in your opening hand, slap it down, and you can drop your hand size down to like 1 or 2 cards even, and then just hit the Tropical Beach. Since it's the first turn you're not attacking, you instantly draw up to 7. So it's really good for consistency. It significantly increases consistency in any deck that plays it. That's something to keep in mind, because there's also going to be times in the match where you're not going to want to attack. You don't have an attacker prepared. You know, they just got rid of your primary attacker, and you just need draw so you can set up your next attacker. That's where Tropical Beach will come in. It'll help you to set that up. It'll help you to draw up to 7, and it'll help you to create your next attacker, or open up options for another strategy like sniping someone, or anything like that. So one thing to know, obviously, though, is that the opponent can use it as well, and it is a double-edged sword in that case. If the opponent is a good player, they're going to utilize Tropical Beach for the times that they're not going to have an attack and they'd rather just draw cards. It's going to help them out as well. So be mindful of the kind of decks that you're going to face, and be mindful of your own deck's limitations, and you'll know whether or not it's smart to play Tropical Beach, or whether it's smarter to, let's say, hold it a turn or two, or not play it at all. If your opponent has 2 cards left in their hand and they haven't done anything for 2 turns, and you draw a Tropical Beach, don't play it down, because they're going to use it to enhance their hand, and they're going to dig themselves out of the hole that they've dug themselves into. So be careful of Tropical Beach, but it is a very, very useful trainer, very, very useful stadium, and you'll likely want to play it. It's expensive though. The prices have varied online, but the online prices lately for the 2012 version has been about 60-ish packs. That's very expensive. The 2011 version is even more expensive. I've heard up to 100 packs for this thing. So this isn't for the faint of heart. If you have the packs online to find a couple of copies, or you happen to have a couple of copies on hand, then you can utilize it. But don't break your bank to get a couple of copies, unless you just really want them for the consistency they can provide for the Legacy format. Next one we're going to talk about is Catcher. So, here we have Catcher. This was, I think, a 4 of in every deck before the errata. And let me actually go to an old copy and show you exactly why. So this is switch your opponent's active Pokemon with one of his or her bench Pokemon. That's how this card used to work. It was an item card that allowed you to basically play a Lysander as an item. And your opponent switched, and you got to pick which one of your opponent's bench Pokemon came to the active. So it was ridiculously overpowered, and it was like a 3/4 of in every deck. And it was the main way that you could play a Lysander-like card back in the day. And they realized how strong it was, so they made an errata. And what they did now is, now you have to flip a coin. And if it's heads, then you switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon with his or her active. So Catcher got nerfed pretty hard. And right around the time they did this, then they printed Lysander as a supporter option for the same effect. So people now still play 2 Lysander in every deck, right? So that's just the power of being able to switch your opponent's bench to the active. But unfortunately, in Legacy, there is no Lysander. And the way Catcher works in Legacy is with the errata form. So with Catcher, you're gonna have to flip a coin to pull the opponent's bench to the active, and it's a pretty huge nerf in that way. However, be aware that in Legacy, there just is no consistent way to bring your opponent's bench to the active outside of a specialty situation like with Genesect's Red Signal. Genesect has an ability to do the same effect. So there's no other way except Catcher. So you're going to see this card since it's the only option people have. You'll see it maybe as a 2 to 3 of in decks, maybe a 2 of. With Junk Arm, you have a chance to reach, to use it again and again. But it's good to be aware of it. It's good to be aware that it's the only item option to bring the opponent's bench to the active. And it's good to be aware of the errata, because if you have an old copy like this one, it's not going to work the way that it's written here. So be aware that it's a coin flip, and no matter what the text says, all catchers are going to be a coin flip. Moving on, we're going to go to Random Receiver. It says reveal cards from the top of your deck until you reveal a supporter card. Put it in your hand, shuffle the other cards back in your deck. So back in the day when there was no VS Seeker, this was your way of getting supporters. It just basically goes through the deck from top to bottom, one by one, until it reaches a supporter, and then you take that supporter into your hand and you shuffle your deck. So it's a good way to dig out a supporter from your deck. And it's an item, so if you use it once with Junk Arm, you can use it again. So this is a huge consistency tool in Legacy. If you don't want to pack your deck with a ton of supporters, some builds run up to 15 supporters, which is kind of crazy, but they do. And So Random Receiver gives you the option of cutting your supporter counts down and substituting it with Random Receiver. Now it's not going to be as consistent because you don't have control over which supporter you get. Just whatever it finds first is the one you're going to get. So there is a limitation in that regard, and that's why you're not going to run heavy counts of Random Receiver. You're not going to run 4 Random Receiver expecting to have a consistent draw engine. But you will run maybe 2 or 3, probably 2, and it gives you a kind of glue for your deck to be able to pull supporters when you need them. It gives you the option of cutting down supporters from your deck, and with Junk Arm you can reuse it again and again. So this is a huge consistency card. Me personally, in my builds, I haven't really utilized it as much as I probably should. I do need more experience with it, and I know a lot of competitive builds use it. So I'm still trying to figure out the perfect formula for how many supporters to use versus how many random receivers, things like that. And so we'll talk about that in some future videos as well. But for now, just know that this card is a good way to grab a supporter from your deck in a VS less seeker format. Okay, moving on from that, we have Scylla. So Scylla used to be a much more played card than what it is these days. People sometimes ran even 3 or 4 Scylla. So back in the day, this was a pretty good option to grab a trainer from your deck, especially with Junk Arm having rotated for the Black and White era. Without Junk Arm, you're not gonna be able to use trainer cards over and over again. So Scylla was a good option to grab it from your deck. Let's say you need that critical switch, you need that float stone, you need a stadium, or you need to set up for the next turn, and you wanted a draw supporter for next turn. Then you can just Scylla into a draw supporter, you can Scylla into a stadium or an item or whatever you want. In this case, though, in Legacy, Scylla can get you Junk Arm, and Junk Arm can get you any item from your discard. So that's a huge utility that Scylla has now with Junk Arm being in this format. And so, honestly, you might see two Skyllas in almost every deck, if not, at least one Scylla. Not everyone's playing Scylla, though, and I'm not sure why, considering that you can get Junk Arm from Scylla, so a late game Scylla can get you anything from your discard pile in terms of items. So not sure why not more people are playing it, but it's definitely to be aware of some of its utility. In a lot of decks, it's really useful. And think about it this way, right? If you run both Tropical Beach and you run Junk Arm, Scylla can act as a draw supporter for Tropical Beach. You Scylla into Tropical Beach, use an Ultra Ball or Junk Arm to discard some cards from your hand, slap that Tropical Beach down, and then draw up to 7. So there's your draw support for the turn. It can also get you Junk Arm to get that item from discard. If that's what you needed. It can get you any ace spec you want. So in Genesect decks, Scylla is your option to get G Booster out of your deck really fast. So yeah, it's definitely one of the most useful cards. Especially, it's even more useful in Legacy than it is in Standard. So try it out, see how you like it, see if it's the glue for your deck that you really needed to boost your consistency. If they find a way to Hypnotoxic laser you and you're asleep and you need that critical switch that is in the deck or in the discard, Scylla's your option to get that switch or the Junk Arm to grab it from your discard or your deck. That's just one example of the utility that Scylla can provide. But yeah, let's move on to Hypno Laser. So before this card rotated out of Standard and still in Expanded, it's one of the most played cards you're going to find. Because your opponent's active Pokemon is now poisoned, guaranteed. Flip a coin. If heads, your opponent's active Pokemon is also asleep. So with a flip a coin, you can put your opponent to sleep, but you guarantee them poison. And people combine this with Verbank. So Verbank put 2 more damage counters on poison Pokemon between turns. So a Hypnotoxic Laser with a Verbank will do 30 damage to the active. Flat out, point blank. It can also keep the opponent asleep, because if you flip heads on the Hypnotoxic Laser and the opponent goes to sleep, and they flip tails on the sleep flip, they stay asleep and they take 30 damage. So this combo of Stadium and item is people thought it was borderline broken with the amount of passive damage it could do. And it changes a lot of decks. It changes a lot of matchups, because now you don't need to hit 170 damage to take out an EX, or 180 damage to take out a bulky EX. You only need to hit 140 or 150. So it opens up a world of two hit combinations. It opens up a world of one hit combinations. One example, let's say, being Lugia. The Plasma Lugia does 120 damage from Gale Force, right? With 2 Deoxys on the bench, it does 140 damage. With 1 Hypno Laser with a Verbank in play, it does up to 170. And so you knock out the opponent's EX that way. So for that card as an example, it makes a world of a difference. For Genesect, again, it can make a difference. Genesect does 100, Verbank does 140, and then if you had hit with Virizion beforehand, Virizion did 50, so you're going to be able to hit the 180 for any knockout with a Verbank and a Hypno Laser. And in decks that are usually anti-EX decks, they're definitely going to utilize Verbank, because anti-EX decks are going to be using non-EX Pokemon, and non-EX Pokemon don't hit that much. They don't hit that hard as EXs do. So they're going to need to build up passive damage in different ways. Whether it's through Jardigon's Rough Skin to do an extra 20, Rocky Helmet to do another 20, or Verbank City to do a 30 and put them asleep. This is how they're going to stack up damage to hit that KO for EXs. So this is a combo that you probably know about, and you're definitely going to see in Legacy, because it's played a lot in Legacy. The other one is the Seeker. So we don't have VS Seeker, and we don't have AZ, but we have Seeker. Seeker says each player returns one of his or her bench Pokemon and all cards attached to it to his or her hand. So this is a huge supporter. If you know AZ, right? AZ allows you to pick up a Pokemon from your bench or active, but you discard all cards attached to it. With Seeker, if it's on your bench, you just pick it up and take all the cards with it. So let's say you have a damaged EX, right? The EX has gotten hit once. Let's say it's damaged to like 130, 140 damage. One Hypnotoxic Laser with Verbank is going to knock it out. You can retreat it and pick it up with Seeker, and all the damage is healed. All your cards are there in your hand to play down again. So very powerful. Another example of its utility is Jirachi. So again, we're going to talk about Jirachi later, but Jirachi is used to grab a supporter from your deck. If you have a Seeker in your hand, you pick up that Jirachi. It takes out a target for snipe damage, and it'll allow you to use it again the next turn if you really want. It also allows you to open up bench space. Sometimes in these matches, with all these EX heavy decks, your bench can be taken up pretty quickly. So Seeker allows you to open up a bench option. Let's say you just bench too many Pokemon early on, and now you don't have any space to put down a critical Pokemon that you needed. Like let's say it's the old Shaymin that allows you to move energy. Seeker will give you the option to do that. So you won't see it as too many. You won't see it in too many decks, but it's good to know that it exists, because of the power that it has in healing and utility in terms of reusing Pokemon like Shaymin and Jirachi. Be aware that it lets the opponent pick a Pokemon too. So if your opponent has a heavily damaged EX on the bench that you're trying to knock out, you don't want to play Seeker, because they're going to heal that Pokemon the same way you're going to heal yours. So it's a double-edged sword in that regard, but since you have the option of when to play it, you can play it only when the situation benefits you. Okay? Energy Exchanger. So this isn't a huge card. You might see it as a one or two of in some decks, but it's good to know it exists, because it says choose an energy card from your hand, show it to your opponent, and put it on top of your deck. Search your deck for an energy card, show it to your opponent, and put it on your hand. Shuffle your deck afterwards. So basically, if you have an energy card in your hand and you don't need that energy type, you need another energy type, Energy Exchanger is your option. You just take the energy card that you have in your hand, put it on the top of your deck, and find the energy card you wanted. So the other thing to note is it says choose an energy card from your hand, right? So what that means is it works on special energy as well. So you have a special energy in your hand or in your deck and you really want it, this is your option to get it. So definitely useful for certain things like plasma. Genesect can use it. A lot of things can utilize this, even if you don't run any different energy types. So good to know this exists. Good to know. Again, it's a trainer card, so you're going to be able to reuse it with the junk arm, and that means you only need to run 1 or 2 copies at most, and junk arm can be there as a glue to use up more if you need it. And in the same vein, we have Energy Returner. So Energy Returner is search your discard pile for 4 basic energy cards, show them to your opponent, and shuffle them into your deck. So these days in Standard, we have Energy Recycler, which recycles up to 5 energy, I believe. Energy Returner just says you pick 4 basic energy cards from your discard pile and put them into your deck. That's it. It's an item card, which means you can reuse it with Junk Arm. So if your deck really relies on energy, or, like let's say your deck discards a ton of energy early on to do powerful attacks and you just need more energy late game, Energy Returner is your option. Genesect is a perfect example of this because Genesect discards 2 cards to use G-Booster. And so eventually, one of the biggest weaknesses of Genesect is that it runs out of energy. Now, there are options to mitigate that, but it can run out of energy, especially if you're discarding 2 energy per attack. And especially if you're using G-Booster on non-EXs, you're not going to be racking up those prizes quickly. So you're going to be spending 2 energy for a single prize. You're going to burn out your energy pretty quickly there. So Energy Returner is an option. With Virizion, if you play an Energy Returner, the energy goes back into your deck, and then you hit the opponent with Virizion, and you can pull the energy from your deck onto Genesect directly. So that's one good combination there of how to manipulate your energy if you've discarded too many. And it also allows you the option of just, discarding energy early on. Like let's say you have 3 energy in your hand, but you really need that critical item, and you're just gonna have to Juniper it, to find it. You've lost 3 energy just early on in the game. Energy Return is your way to recovering those valuable resources. So 1 or 2 of in some decks, but good to know it exists. Let's see what else we have. Plasma decks are going to be huge in this new format, and so you have Shadow Triad as a supporter for Plasma decks. It says put a Team Plasma card from your discard pile to your hand. There are a huge variety of Team Plasma cards, including Plasma Special Energy, Team Plasma Pokemon, and Plasma supporters like Colress. So, and even Plasma tools like G-Booster. So, between tools, supporters, energy, and Pokemon, this card in Plasma decks is really useful to recover resources from your discard pile. In Genesect, you can basically recover a Plasma Energy and attach it for the red signal to Lysander the opponent. Sometimes if you have a dead hand and you have Shadow Triad and you've used a Colress, you can Shadow Triad into a Colress for next turn. It acts like a Scylla for the discard pile in that regard. Sometimes if you have a Colress Machine accelerates a Plasma Energy from your deck onto one of your Plasma Pokemon. And usually you're not going to run too heavy counts of Colress Machine, so Shadow Triad can get a Colress Machine from your discard to be able to use to accelerate an energy and break the one energy per turn rule that way. So a lot of different uses for Shadow Triad, especially in Plasma decks. It can recover Pokemon as well. Like let's say you had to burn through a couple of Genesects early on and you really need another one. Shadow Triad is there. So in Plasma decks, this is a really useful card. So in those decks, I can see it as a 2 of or 1 of. Unfortunately, it's a supporter, so you can't reuse it with Junk Arm. But that's why you kind of want to run at least 2. Jirachi can pull it from your deck, so it's not like it can be buried in your deck by any means. You have ways of getting it if you really need it. So it's a really good supporter for Plasma, and something to know about for sure. Okay, That's really a lot of the items that I wanted to cover. Um, let's go on to some of the Pokemon. So I've talked about Jirachi so many times, and let's take a look at it. So Jirachi has the ability Stellar Guidance. When you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench, you may search your deck for a supporter card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Shuffle your deck afterwards. Um, this was used, and it still is used and expanded, to get any supporter that you want. Some supporters are like techie supporters, like Shadow Triad and Scylla, but then there's other supporters like draw supporters. I can't tell you how many times I've had a starting hand. I've run a lot of supporters in my builds, and I still start with a dead hand so many times. But if I have any sort of Duel Ball or Ultra Ball or Jirachi outright in my hand, I can get a draw supporter whenever I want. If in the middle of the match I need a G booster really fast, for that turn, I can Jirachi into a Scylla, Scylla into a G booster, or Jirachi into a Shadow Triad and pull my G booster from the discard pile. So it's really useful to get critical supporters, especially techie supporters. But the downside, of course, is it's an EX, so it gives 2 prizes, and its HP is 90. That's even less than Shaymin. So it's a huge liability on the bench once you play it. And outside of Seeker and Scoop Up, there's really not a good way to get it back into your hand, right? So it becomes a huge target for for a Red Signal / Lysander from a Genesect, and it can be sniped in 3 turns by Darkrai and Kyurem and Landorus. So, and ironically, those 3 cards, those 3 Pokemon are going to be pretty competitive, and they're used a lot, and you're going to see them for sure in matches. So Jirachi is high risk, high reward. Some people have different opinions about Jirachi. They say that they don't want the liability on their bench and all this other stuff, but it kind of depends on your playstyle. If you're the riskier playstyle and you just want to get set up quickly for that really fast KO, or you just really like the utility it gives you late game to get that critical supporter, like that critical Scylla into a critical item or whatever you want, then or an N, like maybe you want an N at the very end of the match to really to nail down the win or the loss, or flip the match in your favor. That's what Jirachi is going to be there for. So it has a lot of utility, but it has a lot of risk, and so try it out in your decks. See if the risk is worth the reward for you. Another big Pokemon is going to be Smeargle. So here's what the old Smeargle says. It has the Poke Power. Now let's talk about Poke Powers for a second. There are abilities that we know of, like Shaymin's Setup, Genesect's Red Signal, Darkrai's ability that allows free retreat. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. Dark Cloak, I think. Yeah, Dark Cloak. But those abilities can be shut off by Garbodor, which has the ability of locking other abilities, if there's a tool attached. But these are called Poke Powers. So Garbodor does not shut these off. Nothing shuts these off except for other Heart Gold Soul Silver era Pokemon. Like I'm not sure of one off the top of my head actually, but just know that Garbodor does not shut these off. So it has the ability Portrait. Once during your turn, before you attack, if Smeargle is your active, you may look at your opponent's hand. If you do, choose a supporter card you find there and use the effect of that card as the effect of this power. This power can't be used if Smeargle is affected by a special condition. So, this card was used heavily back in the day, and it's used a lot in Legacy. In slow to mid-speed decks, they use Smeargle early on to get extra draw support to help set up faster. You can basically use Smeargle's ability as, like, if they have an Oak in their hand, the opponent, you use Smeargle, you use Oak, and then you can still use a supporter for your turn. So it's almost like using 2 supporters in a single turn. So that's why a lot of people play this card, and its HP is 70, so it's not going to die very easily. It is just outside of the HP of 60, which is a critical level for damage. 20 times 3 is 60. 30 times 2 is 60. 70 is an oddball, so you're going to survive maybe one extra turn, and it allows you to use Portrait in that extra turn. So it's going to be really useful for increasing the consistency of your deck if you can get it active. Some people, what they'll do is they'll just leave Smeargle active until they've set up, and then the opponent has to take the energy to knock it out while you've been setting up, and so now you bring your attacker that you've powered up now with all the extra supporters you got to play, and you can just start turning the tide in your favor. It's got a retreat cost of 1, which is very respectable. Floatstone it to make it 0 if you really want. One important thing to know about this card, it is a somewhat of a double-edged sword. Now, what it says is if you use Portrait, you absolutely have to use a supporter if they have one. So, let's say that you have a full hand, right, in the very beginning of the match, and you use Portrait before you use your own supporter, right? And all they have is a Colress in their hand, and you have one bench Pokemon. They have 0. Guess what? You're Colressing for 1 because you have to. You haven't used your own supporter, but once you use Portrait, you have to use the supporter you find in the opponent's hand. So it's a double-edged sword in that regard. If you only have a Juniper in your hand and you use Portrait and they have a Scylla, you have to get an item. And if you don't get the item, if you get the item and it's not useful and you have to Juniper it away, it's another example of something that you're stuck doing. Once you use it, basically you're forced to use a supporter. So the other thing is if they have a Juniper and that's all they have in their hand, and you use Portrait, you're losing your hand regardless of whatever was there. So definitely be careful of when you use this card. The other example of when it can be a drawback is if you have no supporter or you discard your supporter with Ultra Ball expecting to be able to use Portrait and they don't have a supporter in their hand, then you get nothing. So be mindful that it's very somewhat situational because of their hand. In general, most players will want at least one supporter for next turn in their hand. They're not gonna have no supporters unless they're dead drawing or something. So that's gonna be one example of using Smeargle the right way. Moving on to Shaymin. So this is not going to be something you're going to see everywhere, but it's good to know it exists because it's got the Pokemon Power Celebration Wind. Once during your turn, whoops, looks like I got logged out. Don't you love the server stability? We just spent, 14 to 16 hours to increase server stability, and they're going to log me out. What are you going to do? But, while it's loading, we'll talk about Shaymin. So it's got the ability Celebration Wind. Basically, the way it works is when you put it from your hand to your bench, you can move around any energy from any Pokemon to another Pokemon in any way possible. So let's say you have a Pokemon that's heavily damaged. It's got like 140 HP, or it's taken 140 damage, and it needs another 30 damage only. And the opponent has a sniping Pokemon, and it has like all your energy that you've used to power it up. You can use a Celebration Wind to move all that energy onto another attacker to at least save your energy so that you don't lose the energy along with the Pokemon when it dies. The other example is Max Potion. So it's kind of a remedial aromatise where you can move the energy off and then use a Max Potion to heal the full, but you've used the bench in the process and it's like a one-time effect, right? So it's going to be situational when you use it, when it's valuable. Most of the time, you're going to want to attack with your damaged Pokemon just because, you're already powering up a secondary maybe. Alright, this thing's like completely dead. So I'm going to like close the screen and then open it up again. Okay, but yeah, so hey, sorry about that, but I got everything set back up. And I think we've talked enough about Shaymin, so let's move on to another one. This is kind of a... Now we're kind of digging at the bottom of the barrel here, but this is something worth knowing because it has an interesting effect. So, here is the Rotom that has the Poke Power Mischievous Trick. Once during your turn before your attack, you may switch one of your face-down prize cards with the top card of your deck. Power can't be used if Rotom is affected by a special condition. Now you might be asking yourself, when would this ever be useful? Well, in Legacy, there is the option of town map, obviously, but there's also another option. We have this alpha lithograph. It says, look at all of your face-down prize cards. So, here's what you do. You play the alpha lithograph, and you take a snapshot of all of your face-down prize cards, right? So now you know what's in your prizes, your opponent does not. And then you combine that with Rotom, and now it's almost like you have a side deck. Once during your turn, you may put a card from your hand into your prizes, or basically take a card from your prizes into on the top of your deck, and then just kind of reverse back and forth. So it's almost like a side deck. Once you know what cards are in your prizes, you can start moving them around to take which ones you want, and you're going to draw into them the next turn. So it's really interesting that way. There are also cards like Good Rod that can help kind of boost that ability. So Good Rod, flip a coin, if heads, search your discard pile for a Pokemon, show it to your opponent, and put it on top of your deck. So here, and then if it's tails, you put a trainer on the top of your deck. So here's a way to kind of manipulate the top of your deck and your prizes with this kind of engine. It's kind of a techie engine. I don't think you're going to see it all that much, but it's just kind of cool. It's cool to know that it exists, that you're able to manipulate your prizes with Rotom and a couple of trainers. And I brought it up specifically to talk about the lithograph, because this lithograph is going to be better than town map. When you play town map, your opponent knows what your prizes are as well as you. So if they see that you have a couple of critical cards in your prizes, they're going to be able to play around that, and they're going to be able to put you in a jam because they have information as well as you. But with this alpha lithograph, only you have the information. So you just take a picture of when you see the prizes, and then save it somewhere, like on a notepad or something like that, or Imgur. Then anytime you need to take a prize, just look at your picture and you know exactly what you're taking, and you know where to take it. So this way, you know what your prizes are, your opponent doesn't. And that's a pretty powerful ability. That's a powerful effect. So this is actually a really useful lithograph, and I don't have any of them here, but they're worth around like 10-ish packs maybe. You should be able to get it from public trading if you really want it. But that's an option. Another Pokemon to talk about is Sableye. So most people will know about this Sableye. It's got where's that Sableye at? It's got Junk Hunt. So Junk Hunt puts 2 item cards from a discard pile into your hand, and it's an attack. So one of the biggest decks in Legacy is going to be Darkrai Sableye. And Sableye is used to basically keep reusing Dark Patch to power up a couple of Darkrai's on the bench. You can also basically just keep reusing hammers or loss removers to keep thinning out the opponent's energy and it's a form of energy denial while you're powering up your Darkrai on the bench. So the way that deck functions, and we'll talk about it also, we're going to have a video on that deck, so you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, but Sableye is there to start off with, to disrupt your opponent while you power up your attackers, and then once that part is done, you just use your attacker to finish off the match. So it's a really useful card in that deck and in some other decks if you run a dark types. So worth knowing about. The other Pokemon I want to talk about And we might have a one on this too. This will be in the Darkrai video, but it's got Mind Jack. This is a non-EX option for Dark decks, basically. It does 20 more damage for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So they have a full bench that's 100 damage and 120 total. So a non-EX with 2 energy does 120 damage. That's a lot. There's another example that we're going to go over because that's such a powerful amount of damage for a non-EX to do with low energy cost. So definitely this one is worth knowing about because you're probably going to see it in dark decks since Darkrai's are everywhere these days. Speaking of the other one, let's just go into it. Bouffalant. This card got rotated out quite a while back, but in Legacy it's definitely legal and you're going to see it if you're going to run EX decks. It's got the ability Boofer. Any damage done to this Pokemon by attacks is reduced by 20. So it's a built-in Evolight. And if you actually slap on an Evolight to this thing, that's negative 40 damage on any damage that Bouffalant takes. It's important because it actually is a critical amount of damage reduction. Genesect is one of the biggest decks in Legacy format, and Genesect hits for 100 damage. But with Boofer, you only do 80 damage, so you're actually missing out on the KO with Genesect. And you can't even snipe this guy, because if this guy's on the bench, the ability is still into effect. So if Genesect tries to hit that 20 damage snipe, it doesn't do anything to Bouffalant. So you almost basically have to G-booster it to like get rid of it. And in the meanwhile, if they can power up Goldbreaker, they're smacking you for 120 damage on an EX. So this is heavily used in anti-EX decks to just rack up damage. And it is hard to KO for a lot of options. Like, even Darkrai will only do like 70 damage to this guy. With Hypnotoxic Laser, it makes up the difference. Dark Claw as well, which I forgot to talk about, but we'll talk about, makes up a difference. But in general, this is a powerful attacker with this kind of ability, and you're gonna see it in anti-EX decks for sure. Let's go into Kyurem. So Plasma decks are gonna be using Kyurem for sure. It's got the ability it's got the attack Frost Spear. It does 30 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon, and you do 30 base for 2 energy. If you just look at it from that perspective, like, it's not anything special, right? Except for the fact that you have Deoxys in this format. Deoxys has the ability Power Connect, so your Team Plasma Pokemon's attacks, excluding Deoxys, does 10 more damage to the active Pokemon. So each Deoxys you have will do 10 more damage. Or your Frostbeard will do 10 more damage. So let's say you have the maximum count, right? You have 4 Deoxys on the bench, and you're hitting the opponent with Kyurem. That's 40 plus 30 is 70 damage. And you do 30 to the bench. You slap on a silver bangle to Kyurem, which hits EXs for 30. It's like a muscle band that hits for 30 if your opponent has an EX playing and you're using a non-EX. So Frostbeard will do 100 damage to an EX with Silver Bangle and 4 Deoxys on the bench, and it does 30 to a bench Pokemon. So Frostbeard is really, really powerful for 2-hit KOs. Like, if you think about with Hypnotoxic Laser, you're 2-shotting EXs anyway with 2 energy. Like, even if you don't do full damage with Frostbeard, like you do like 50 to 60 damage. Like, at minimum, if you do 60 damage, right? So that's 3 Deoxys on the bench, and you do 60 damage. Your Hypnotoxic Laser brings it up to 90. That's 90 times 2 is 180. You're KOing EX that way. So you'll see Kyurem a lot in Legacy because it's one of the more powerful cards that you're going to find. It's a non-EX, so you only lose 1 prize when it goes down, and you don't even need any Plasma Energy to use it. And Blizzard Burn is 120, and it only takes 1 more energy than Frostbeard. So it's a cleanup attack, obviously, and you can't use it. You can't chain it, but if you need to get to that KO range, Blizzard Burn option is there for just 1 more energy. Frostbeard can just keep racking up bench damage and active Pokemon damage, and it's a powerful combination with Deoxys. So you're gonna definitely see this run around. The other one to talk about is Reshiram. Which one is it? So we're just go with the gold one. Outrage has been a powerful attack, and Blue Fair is powerful attack. So Genesect being one of the most powerful decks in Legacy, you're gonna see Reshirams around. Reshiram is a fire type, so it hits Genesect for weakness. Blue Flare, you know, you discard 2 fire and you do 120 damage. Back then, that was pretty powerful. And, you know, with a lot of the EXs these days, they're not really all that strong. 120 is not that strong anymore, but still, it's worth knowing about because Silver Bangle it up to 150 and Hypnotoxic Laser into 180, and you're hitting your EX KO range. And because it is a hard counter to Genesect, if you can power it up, you'll see it running around. One other card here to talk about is Cleffa. I bring this up because Cleffa used to be one of the most competitive cards back in Heart Gold Soul Silver era. Because for no energy, it says shuffle your hand into your deck, then draw 6 cards. Cleffa is now asleep. So it's like an extra supporter basically. You start off with Cleffa in the active. You don't waste any energy powering it up, and you do all of this stuff from your hand. You play a supporter. You strut up whatever you want. Then you hit them with the Eek attack, and you can shuffle your hand and draw 6. So it's almost like you've used a supporter for the next turn without having actually used it. So you can set up a lot faster that way. And the good thing is, Cleffa goes to sleep right then and there. So if it stays asleep, it has got the Poke Body. As long as Cleffa is asleep, prevent all damage done to Cleffa by attacks. So if it's asleep, you can't even hit it. And that's why it slowed down the meta significantly back then, and it allowed people to set up more often than not. But it's got a huge drawback in Legacy because it's 30 HP, and a single Hypnotoxic Laser with the Verbank in play knocks it out. So I mention it because of that fact, because back then it used to be heavily played, and now it won't be as played much in Legacy because of Verbank Laser. But so if you have any plans on playing Cleffa, go for it, but be aware of that risk involved with it. And I said that we were going to talk about Dark Claw, and so let me bring it up here. So with no Muscle Band in Legacy, Dark Claw is kind of the only Muscle Band replacement for Dark types. If this card is attached to a Dark Pokemon, each of the attack of that Pokemon does 20 more damage to the active. So it's a Muscle Band for Darks, right? Darkrai uses it to get to 110 damage and 30 to the bench. If you think about the math there, right? Darkrai is a 110 and 30 to the bench. If in the following turn you bring up that guy that got the 30 damage, and you hit him for 110, that's 140. A Hypnotoxic Laser makes it 170. So you can actually set up KOs, multiple KOs that way. And also you can hit things like Celebi. We'll talk about Celebi when we make the deck video for Genesect Celebi, but I'll just show it off now if it'll let me. Okay, so Celebi has a Force Breath attack. We'll talk about this when we come to it, but it's got 60 HP, right? So that means it's a 2-shot for Darkrai's attack, for Kyurem's attack, and for Lander's attack. So it's that's kind of where Dark Claw and Darkrai come into play. With the snipe damage that Darkrai has, and it can increase its normal attacks to 110, you can really set up KOs that way. Two hits from a Darkrai will knock out an EX regardless, and that's 60 damage anywhere on the bench. So you can very often you get up to 3 prizes with Darkrai. But yeah, so that's kind of what everything I wanted to talk about. Let's go to one more Pokemon, because I don't remember covering it. Suicune. In Legacy, because it's a slower format and it's an EX heavy format, you're going to see more Suicune in Legacy. Because there's also less options to get around it. It's got the ability Safeguard. Prevent all effects of attacks, including damage done to this Pokemon by Pokemon EX. So it's a hard wall for a lot of decks that utilize EXs. Rayquaza can't hit through it. Genesect with no G booster can't hit through it, even though Suicune's weak to grass. Darkrai can't hit through it. So it's a good wall for a ton of decks. The biggest weakness though is that a lot of decks will be running at least one or two non-EX attackers just to counteract these safeguard Pokemon, because there's two of them. There's this one, and then there's Sigilif. So Sigilif also has the ability Safeguard, and it has a attack Psychic. That's 50 plus 10 more damage for each energy attached to the defending Pokemon. So anti-EX decks will run heavy counts of Sigilif and Suicune. A lot of decks, even if they don't have the support to even use these guys' attacks, they'll just toss these two in there, just as like a wall, as a bailout option for a wall to hit, to like, you know, just in case. And it's pretty powerful, to be honest. That's why a lot of EX decks are forced to run non-EX Pokemon to get around these two guys. But Genesect can hit through it with G Booster. It's the only way to KO these guys. So you're using G Booster and you're losing 2 energy to knock out a 1 prize Pokemon. So it's definitely detrimental in that regard. So, you know, it's worth knowing that these two are around, because you're going to be seeing them for sure. And yeah, so that's kind of everything I wanted to cover. This is the first video of the Legacy series, so we're going to have a lot of deck videos coming out soon after this. We're going to showcase a lot of the biggest meta decks. We're going to showcase some of the rogue decks, and we're going to, we're going to basically just try to create a Legacy info center for you guys to be able to use this format effectively. Because whether you like the loss of Unlimited or not, Legacy is here to stay. And whether you like the idea that, there's no new sets coming into the format, it's going to be here to stay. So you might as well kind of learn how it works. You might as well build a couple of decks that really work well for you in this format. And when it comes time to play tournaments, because if you look at the prizes for the Legacy format tournaments, you win Call of Legends, you win Legendary Treasures. So, and these two kind of packs will probably be swapped out once a new set gets released. Because that's kind of been the way PTCGO does it, is they kind of swap these packs out when there's a new set release. So, maybe this is probably gonna be your main option to get BW era packs and Heart Gold Soul Silver era packs. So you're gonna want to play these tournaments, and you're gonna want to win. So you're gonna need a good deck to be able to get those prizes, and that's where we come in. Us here at Phantom Knight, we're a trading company. We exist in the in-game item exchange center at the PTCGO English forums, and you just come to us if you want to and order whatever card you need. We have some of the most competitive prices available with fast service. We have a huge team, and every one of us is a hard worker. We try to get everything out to you guys fast and cheap. So come on by and take a look at our prices, and order something if you really needed to build that deck you really wanted. And yeah, look forward to some future videos on Legacy. The next couple of videos, I think for sure we're going to make videos on the top tier decks. Like, there's 4 decks that I'm going to absolutely cover. It's going to be Celebi, Genesect, Darkrai, Sableye, Plasma Kyurem, and Rayquaza Eels. Those are kind of the cream of the crop decks in terms of the meta. And we're also going to cover some rogue ones like Yanmega, Magnezone. There's a couple of other ones. There's a Ho-Oh build that I've been working on. It's interesting. In a format with no battle compressor, there's still actually a way to make Ho-Oh somewhat viable. It's kind of interesting to play, and I've had some really cool matches with it, so look forward to that one. But yeah, so I guess I'll see you guys next time. This is Semi from Phantom Knight Trading Company signing off. See you later, guys.